populations and fisheries sustainability and the increasing prevalence of marine plastic pollution, the challenge presented by fishing gear and rope calls for equally global solutions. While working in plastic projects, we also understood that now fishing gear is a subset, of course, of marine plastic, and the full idea is that we address this from a global perspective, and we are now also advancing the agenda in the global agreement to tackle plastic waste and see how can we drive the agenda in a better way. So the full idea here was actually to create a position paper and see if we had shared opinions from different organizations. Some agreed to work with us on the position paper. This will be speaking later. Someone will address this later, and some will just participate in terms of consultation. So the establishment of the extended producer responsibility policies and schemes for fishing gear and ropes represents a clear actionable response to address one major vector of potential pollution derived from fishing activities. The main goal of implementing EPR for this type of waste is to reduce marine plastic pollution by preventing and reducing the volumes of used fishing gear and ropes into the environment. Achieving this goal will require effective collection and recycling of unwanted and end-of-life fishing gear and ropes, as well as reporting and managing accountability of such, resulting in the upstream prevention of ALDFG. The possibility of setting up EPR schemes for fishing gear and ropes can build upon experience of EPR at national and regional levels for other types of end-of-life products. And we've seen this in other countries, in other products, achieving absolutely fantastic results. And international regulation on other related topics, applying lessons learned with consideration of differences in nature, logistics, and conditions. But I will let the next three presenters to share their view on this subject. First, we will have Konstantinos Elemenoglu, from a policy officer from DG Mare at the European Commission. Please let me know if you can hear it.
Thank you for your attention. Stay safe. Thank you for your... Hello, dear participants. My name is Konstantinos Elemenoglu, and I work as a policy officer in DG Mare of the European Commission. I apologize for not being with you today. However, I recorded the presentation you are currently watching, which presents the provisions of the Single-Use Plastic Directive regarding fishing gear, including the requirement for member states to set up extended producer responsibility schemes. Should you have any questions after this presentation, please ask them to the chair, whom I kindly ask to forward them to me so that I reply as quickly as possible. First, allow me to briefly refer to the background that lies behind the Single-Use Plastic Directive. The European Green Deal aims at tackling climate and environmental-related challenges. Among other, it calls for mobilizing industry for a clean and circular economy and a zero-pollution ambition. The Circular Economy Action Plan calls for the design of sustainable products, plastics included, and the decoupling of economic growth from the use of resources. Finally, the zero-pollution vision for 2050 is for air, water, and soil pollution to be reduced to levels no longer considered harmful to health and natural ecosystems. This is translated into key targets for 2030 in the Zero Pollution Action Plan, including reducing plastic litter at sea by 50%. Article 8 of the Single-Use Plastic Directive states that member states have to establish extended producer responsibility schemes for fishing gear containing plastic in accordance with the Waste Framework Directive. The Waste Framework Directive sets the minimum requirements such schemes should include and which refer to roles and responsibilities, waste management targets, equal treatment and representation of producers, waste prevention, geographical coverage, availability of waste collection systems, monitoring, control and reporting, costs to be covered, and treatment of commercially sensitive information.
This guy's on the wrong link. I'll send you the link.
The Single-Use Plastic Directive provides in particular for the following obligations of the Member States concerning extended producer responsibility schemes. Define in a clear way the roles and responsibilities of all actors involved. Producers from other Member States or countries to be able to appoint their representatives. Member States with marine waters to set national minimum annual collection rates of waste fishing gear for recycling. Producers of fishing gear to cover the following costs: the costs of separate collection of waste fishing gear that has been delivered to adequate port reception facilities or to other equivalent collection systems, the costs of transporting the waste to the treatment facilities, the costs of treatment, and the costs of awareness-raising measures informing about reusing alternatives, waste management options and best practices, and the impact of littering and other inappropriate waste disposal on the environment and, in particular, on the marine environment. The Single-Use Plastic Directive requires Member States to report to the Commission for each calendar year data on fishing gear placed on the market and waste fishing gear collected. Member States have to submit this information within 18 months of the end of the reporting year. The first reporting period is the calendar year of 2022. The Commission adopted on 31st of May 2021 an implementing decision laying down the format of the data to be reported. There is also provision for Member States to lay down rules on penalties to apply when national provisions are infringed. Those penalties have to be effective, proportionate, and dissuasive. The Single-Use Plastic Directive requires that the Commission requests the development of a standard for the circular design of fishing gear in view of encouraging and preparing for reusing and recycling fishing gear once it reaches its end of life. The Commission requested on the 10th of February 2021 the European standardization organizations to develop such a standard while taking into consideration technical, circular, environmental and economic requirements. The deadline for this standard to be delivered is by 1st of May 2024. By the 3rd of July 2027, the Commission has to evaluate this directive. Concerning fishing gear, the Commission has to review the data and information reported by Member States on fishing gear placed on the market and waste fishing gear collected, while assessing the organization of the data collection, the methodology used in the Member States, the completeness, the reliability, and the consistency of the data. The report of the Commission to the Parliament and to the Council will be accompanied by a study on the feasibility of establishing binding collection rates for waste fishing gear. Before closing, let me highlight who has to do what and by when. Member States have to submit to the Commission data on fishing gear placed on the market and waste fishing gear collected. The first reporting period is the calendar year 2022, and the deadline to submit the data is 18 months of the end of 2022. The European standardization organizations have been requested to produce a standard for the circular design of fishing gear by the 1st of May 2024. Member states have to establish extended producer responsibility schemes by the 31st of December 2024. By the same date, Member states have to set their minimum annual collection rates of waste fishing gear. Finally, the Commission has to evaluate the Single-Use Plastic Directive by the 3rd of July 2027. For those of you willing to read more details on the subject, please find on this slide the links to the European Green Deal, the Circular Economy Action Plan, the Zero Pollution Action Plan, the Single-Use Plastic Directive, the Commission decision requesting a standard for the circular design of fishing gear, and the Commission decision laying down the format for the reporting of data for fishing gear placed on the market and waste fishing gear collected. Thank you for your attention. Stay safe.
Well, thank you very much to Konstantinos. We now move into the presentation from Joel Baziuk from Global Ghost Gear Initiative. Do we have Joel on the line online?
Hi, everyone. Yes, can everyone hear me?
Yes, they can hear you. Please let me just know when to move the slide.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ro, and thank you, everyone, for taking the time to watch this presentation today. I really appreciate it. My name is Joel Baziuk, the Associate Director of the Global Ghost Gear Initiative. I'll give a quick supplementary presentation to Kostas's presentation from DG Mare, talking about what the Global Ghost Gear Initiative is, what we do, what we're trying to prevent when we're talking about an extended producer responsibility scheme for fishing gear, and then talk about some specific considerations to take into account when talking about this. So if we could move to the next slide, please, Joao. Perfect. I actually can't see this, whether or not the slide has moved. I'm going to assume that it has.
It just moved.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So when we're talking about what is ghost gear, very, very quickly for those who are uninitiated, what we're talking about is the common name for abandoned, lost, or discarded fishing gear. And as Rob pointed out, it's purposely designed to capture marine life. It does so very well. When it's lost, it can continue to do so cyclically for a very long time. And Joao also pointed out some of the statistics that you can see on that slide. I won't go into great detail, but definitely it is a very important, critical part of the marine debris issue at large, and one that is gaining an increased amount of attention over the last few years, especially. Next slide, please.
John?
And so, what are the causes of ghost gear? There are direct causes: adverse weather conditions, strong currents, marine traffic running over it, spatial pressures when different gears are deployed in the same region at the same time to harvest different species. All these things are sort of byproducts of fishing. So this isn't intent. This isn't fishers throwing gear over the side of their boats. This is just things that can happen to cause gear loss while fishers are carrying out their normal activities to feed the world. And I think that's something that's very important to remember, is that no fisher ever wants to lose their gear. This is something that by and large happens due to some of these conditions listed here as well. Intentional discard, when it does happen, is usually linked with illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, or areas where there are simply no other disposal options for gear at the end of its life, which brings us to some of the indirect causes, which are lack of inaccessible or expensive disposal facilities. Some areas of the world might not have any way to get rid of lost fishing gear or end-of-life fishing gear. So in regions where there are no disposal options, it's much more common to see that gear end up in the ocean as a last resort, because there's just simply no other means of disposal. Next slide, please.
Done.
And so what is the Global Ghost Gear Initiative? We're basically the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, or the GGGI, is the only cross-sectoral alliance committed to driving solutions to the problem of ghost gear around the world. Hosted by Ocean Conservancy, we have members, 125 members from around the world, which I'll go into in just a moment. The aims are to improve the health of marine ecosystems, to protect marine life from harm, to safeguard human health and livelihoods by reducing the amount of gear lost in the oceans. And this is a critical point when we're talking about EPR, extended producer responsibility for end-of-life fishing gear, preventing it from getting there in the first place, removing gear that's already there, and then recycling gear that's recovered at the end of its life, and of course promoting EPR where it makes sense to do so, which we'll get into in just a couple of minutes. Next slide, please, Ron.
Done.
Just a quick overview of the global reach of the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, our members, where they are located around the world, some of our member governments as well, some workshops we've hosted around the world with the FAO. Just a quick snapshot, and some of our high-level affiliates you can see at the bottom there as well. Just a quick snapshot of the global reach of the GGGI, very much a global platform. Next slide, please.
Done.
Perfect. And then for our membership, again, just a very quick snapshot. You can see we have over 100 member organizations from the fisheries sector, the industry, retail corporations, academia, NGOs, governments. It's really about bringing all of these different groups together to talk about how we solve this problem on a global scale, and engaging fisheries, fishing gear manufacturers is a critical part of this, as we're talking about extended producer responsibility and talking about its place in the ghost gear issue. Next slide, please. So the GGGI's approach to ghost gear, we have our leadership team, our expert advisory council, our working groups, and we really have three main streams: to build evidence, to define best practice, inform policy, and to catalyze and replicate solutions. And all of those things feed into one another. Next slide, please.
Done.
And one of the key pieces is our best practice framework for the management of fishing gear. We also have a new companion document that was just launched this summer for aquaculture. So these documents are comprehensive guidance documents referencing all of the major actors in the seafood supply chain across prevention, mitigation, recovery strategies. There's risk assessment frameworks for specific gear types or harvesting methods. And these really are designed to be incorporated into sourcing policies, CSR documents, fisheries management plans, seafood certification plans, voluntary guidelines, workshops, all these different types of things. It's really that practical guidance tool. And one of the keys in there, as I referenced earlier, when we're talking about prevention of lost and abandoned fishing gear, is providing that end-of-life solution and making sure that it's collected at end of life and can be recycled. Next slide, please.
Done.
Perfect, thanks, Ron. And so basically what we're talking about here, when we're getting to the crux of the issue at hand, when we're talking about extended producer responsibility for fishing gear, most fishing gear is made of highly recyclable material. Usually it's nylon, polyethylene, polypropylene. There are other variations, of course, but those are the big three. So they're recyclable material. There are markets there for this material, but the biggest challenges are consistency of supply, finding recyclers who can actually take the material in its native form, ensuring it's clean enough to be recycled, and then crucially transportation logistics to get material to these recycling facilities. And this is where extended producer responsibility can play a big role. The image that you see in the slide was me back in my previous days. I worked for Canada's largest commercial fishing harbor for 20 years prior to taking on my role at the GGGI, where I created an end-of-life net recycling program. So I've got the on-the-ground experience to know how this works from scratch back in 2014. And really, although we were able to make the program work, the program is still running in Steveston Harbor. It really was about the transportation and logistics, getting, as Costas mentioned in his presentation earlier as well, the material needs to be separated from its source components. So we need to separate out the different types of plastic, the polyethylene, the nylon, the polypropylene, separate that from the different accoutrement, whether it's floats or lead line or whatever else is making up those nets, ropes, those other pieces of gear. Somebody needs to do that. There needs to be labor to do that. It needs to be separated out into those different waste streams, bagged, or prepared for transport, shipped to wherever the closest recycler is. For a long time, there were only a few different recyclers around the world that were able to take fishing gear. There are more coming up now, but at the same time, there are definitely some transportation logistics. We're also talking about, from an EPR perspective, some of these nets can weigh, 20,000 pounds. So we're not talking about a very simple solution. There's a complex logistical structure that needs to be put in place. And of course, although some of the material has a commercial value to it, and there can be some, recyclers can pay for that material, it depends on the distances needing to be shipped. It depends on a variety of different things to make sure that that's sustainable. And there's always the need to help find funding sources to support the transportation, the logistics. This is where extended producer responsibility enters the scene as one potential tool to help mitigate these challenges, ensure gear stays out of the ocean and that it gets recycled. And a couple of quick notes on ropes versus nets. Nets tend to be made of more pure materials, so fewer mixed polymers. Ropes are commonly made of mixed polymers, which makes recycling a challenge. So things to consider when developing EPR platforms. And also some other things to consider as well is we're talking about plastic nets and ropes, but there are other types of gear that also can cause harm if they're left in the ocean. So talking about things like lobster pots or crab traps, those types of things, as well as multi-filament ropes and lines, and some of the accoutrement that's on some of these nets and these other bits of gear, steel rings, cables, cork lines, lead line. If we're going to try and find a complete solution to fishing gear, then these things need to be taken into consideration as well for any lasting EPR policies should take these other bits into consideration, and whether it's reuse or repurposing or whatever that ends up being. I might pause there. Thanks, Joao, and move on to the next presentation or see if anyone has any questions.
Well, Joel, thank you very much for your participation, and please stand by in case we have some time for questions and answers. So from a EU perspective, from Constantinos, and now hands-on approach, from Joel, we go to Mariana Blanco from the Environmental Law Center from IUCN. Thank you. Is Mariana, she's not online?
Hi.
Hi, Mariana. Please.
Hi. Good. I don't know if I have the option to share presentations from here.
I think so. Just a moment, please.
Yeah. It's coming, Mariana. Good. Perfect. I will then share my screen and start the presentation. Perfect. So we are, as Joao was mentioning in the beginning, presenting this position paper for advocating for EPR for fishing gear. I think from the previous presentations and the idea we have on the issue, it is made very clear that there is a need to provide for options for fishers and for users on how to dispose of this end-of-life fishing gear, and at the same time contribute to the problem of ocean pollution. We believe that this is to be achieved through policies, and we've seen already existing initiatives and examples like the one in the EU that are already addressing this problem in this way. So this is clearly a very challenging task, but it's also a very urgent action we need to take. So from this scenario and this situation is how we came about to develop this position paper with all of these organizations that have extensive knowledge and very reliable data. And this is how we came up with this paper that encompasses 11 recommendations that we hope promote and encourage states and regions and platforms to start thinking and start working on incorporating EPR for fishing gear into their policies. Now, I'm not going to have time to go into detail into every of these recommendations, but I do want to present them quickly to you, and we will share the complete paper afterwards for everyone to read it. So first, one of the recommendations is to do this in a staged approach, including first voluntary mechanisms that include incentives and certifications for the companies and producers that are willing to participate on these schemes, to then move on to binding obligations included in policies and regulations, and also take into account the regional and international scope, even thinking about including these schemes, these principles into international regulations such as MARPOL or the binding international instrument that is being discussed for plastic pollution at the UNEP level. There is also a need to define very clearly key concepts like what are we going to understand for producers, for users, and for what fishing gear, but also to clearly set the responsibilities for each of them in the different stages of the process. There's also an importance in coordinating the design of the schemes with existing policies and regulations on EPR and related topics, and including it into new legislation and policy as a way to optimize what is being used and the resources, but also not forgetting about those very special characteristics of these products and of the sector. We also think it's important to promote this from the perspective of the regional and thematic platforms to hope to achieve a more broad reach on the impact at a regional and hopefully a global scale. Not forgetting about risk assessment data and obviously on the general recommendations of management across the seafood value chain. Of course, it will be basic to create these governance structures with specific mandates and functions and that deal with compliance logistics and this very important aspect of monitoring, evaluation, and reporting to have very reliable and complete data for decision making. And again, not forgetting about synergies that could exist with other mechanisms. In terms of the funds being obtained or the resources being obtained through these EPR systems or schemes, it is also within those governance structures very important to develop these administrative structures that will manage the funds, that will work on principles on how to do this, and also that can develop how is this fees, how are the fees going to be set up to achieve fairly distributed burdens of the management of the whole system. Then there's one of the biggest challenges here is how to address jurisdiction. We have to deal with jurisdiction in marine spaces, which is very, very specific and has its own rules. We have coastal spaces, we have different types of jurisdictions from the administrative point of view. So it is very important to consider those elements to include international instruments such as the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention, and to also work a lot on promoting cross-boundary cooperation. In terms of the financial schemes and instruments needed to develop EPR for fishing gear, there's a need to innovate in terms of financial and other types of instruments and to implement examples of things that have also worked on other EPR schemes, such as the deposit return, and of course, report the consumption of these actual products. And one key element here is to, for example, only allow the purchase of new products once the users have presented the end-of-life certificates. And of course, making the reporting of lost gear a mandatory action. Then in terms of implementation, we think it's important to make upstream solutions a priority from the design of the actual products, making sure that they have an important percentage of recyclable material, that they can be easily separated, and then again to promote benefits and improve collection and recycling. Well, I have mentioned this various times throughout the presentation, but again, monitoring and evaluation is very, very important here to measure by impact and to make those reports mandatory, to have good data that will also contribute to prevent this issue at a global level. And a couple of databases here that are important, one that Joel was also talking about, and then the UNEP from the EU. And as in any public policy, it is important and it is key and it is basic for the actual functioning of the policy to include the stakeholders involved in the process, in this case, the businesses, the decision makers at various levels, from government, municipalities, and other institutions included that have responsibilities, to the informal sector that is very important in a lot of countries, and that is also a challenge to be solved, but without this, there is no guarantee of the success of such a proposal. Now, why EPR? We do believe that this is a valuable and cost-effective tool that can be flexible, innovative, and that poses the actions at the post-consumer phase, but that can also influence decisions at the upstream level to achieve the ultimate goal, that is to, of course, reduce ocean plastic pollution. To end, I just want to say that this is, of course, not the one thing that is going to solve all the pollution problems in our ocean, but it's definitely one important tool in many, many solutions that are urgently needed. So thank you very much, and we hope to share the complete paper with you afterwards.
Thank you very much, Mariana, and I'm being signalized that there will be no time whatsoever for questions and answers, so thank you very much for coming. And then please, if you have any questions, you address directly to the emails I can provide now. Thank you very much for coming.